Hey guys, Chef Ro here. Today we are going to make Gougeres. Now Gougeres is just a fancy name for a cheese bread that is based on a dough called pâte à choux. Pâte à choux is the same dough that you'll use for eclairs, for cream puffs, and my favorite, Gougeres. Very simple to make. Once you understand how to make it, you'll never get it wrong again. So what you're going to start with is water, butter, salt, and sugar. Here in my pan I have half a cup of water, 4 tablespoons of butter, a pinch of salt, and 2 pinches of sugar. Now I've got the butter cut into small pieces. You can see it's not necessary. It does just make it melt a bit faster, which will help us just make the dish a little bit faster. But if you just throw the whole thing in there, you just have to be careful and moderate your temperature a little bit more that way, because you don't want the water to all boil and evaporate off before the butter is melted. So you can see my butter is basically all melted here. You do want to make sure to use unsalted butter, as in all cooking and baking, because you don't want the salt to throw off the ratios of the other ingredients. Okay? And all we're going to do is wait for that to come to a boil. You can see that it's starting to simmer. Now, if you don't want to use butter and you want to use a different fat, every other fat is interchangeable. I've made them with bacon fat, with margarine, with I've even made it with vegetable oil, especially if you're trying to be dairy-free. But any fat will work for this base dough. Okay, so you can see I've now got boiling. So I'm going to turn the heat off. And I'm going to add my half a cup of flour all at once, okay? And you're going to stir until it's combined. Once the white has all gone away, you're going to turn the heat back on, okay? This is a double cooked dough. We need to cook it first on the stovetop and then again in the oven. So, while I'm waiting for this to finish this cooking, you should have your oven going at about 375 degrees if you have convection, or 400 degrees if you do not. Anytime a recipe calls for a temperature, you always want to drop it 25 degrees for convection. Okay. All right. So if you notice, this has turned into a pretty smooth ball here. And you see this film that's here on the bottom of the pan. That is a good sign. So when you have that film, it's hard to see that in a nonstick pan, so you don't want to worry about the film so much. As notice, it has turned into a very smooth dough. That's what we're looking for here. Okay, if you can get it into a ball like that, you are done. Turn the heat off. I'm going to mix this all by hand, because I'm doing such a small batch. If you're doing a larger batch, you're welcome to do it in a mixer. I have just personally found that anything under 4 eggs, if you put it in a mixer, it's going to over-mix it, okay? And then instead of rising like this, like we want it to, it's going to just rise this way and spread. And then we won't have that beautiful hollow center that is so indicative of a pâte à choux. Okay, so if I was going to do this in a mixer, I would take this dough and put it into a mixer fitted with a paddle attachment and put it on the lowest speed possible and basically let it go until the steam stops coming out. What we're trying to do is we're trying to cool it enough that the egg doesn't scramble upon impact here. If you scramble the egg, you're not going to have any luck with them rising either. Because if you notice in the ingredients, I didn't mention any baking soda, baking powder, yeast, any other type of leavener. The entire leavening in pâte à choux is done with eggs. Okay. So I'm just kind of gently stirring this around. I don't want to work it too much. Again, don't want to overdevelop that gluten, because it'll just wreak havoc on the rise. Okay. So if I can kind of touch it, it's a little bit cool still, or a little bit warm still, okay? Now, one note on eggs, make sure that you're using large eggs. Extra large eggs are going to be a little too big. Mediums aren't going to be quite big enough. If you only have mediums, it's fine. you can use them. You'll just need a little extra. And if you have extra large, you just want to take the second egg and scramble it and only start with about 3/4 of that so that you don't have too much egg. It'll throw off the flavor of it. Okay? All right. I have this cool enough, I think. See, I can put my hand in here. Okay? So I have it cool enough that an egg is not going to scramble. So now we're going to move on. If you're doing this by hand, the next two things I'm going to tell you seem ridiculous, but I'm telling you it makes a huge difference. Number one, you've got to keep your spoon straight up and down, just like this. Number two, you can only stir in one direction once you add the eggs. Okay? Sounds silly, right? But basically what we're doing is we're mimicking the paddle attachment if you were using your mixer. Now that my dough is cool enough to add an egg, I'm going to crack the egg. And we all know to crack it flat on the table, never on the side, right? And we're going to put the egg straight in there. First one only, okay? You only want one egg at a time, very important. If you are doing a very large batch, once you get to about 8 eggs, you can add them 2 at a time, but under about 8 eggs, you only want to do it 1 at a time. Okay? Now we are going to stir in one direction, and you're going to sit there and go, this is never going to mix. I promise you it will. You'll sit here and go and go and go and go, and you'll think it's never going to come together, and then all of a sudden it will. But the very important thing is once it does actually mix into a consistent dough, you must stop immediately. Again, we do not want to overmix. Okay, see how I've got my dough? Stop. And now we go with the next egg. Okay. Here is where I also like to add a little bit of mustard. I only do this if I'm doing gougere. If I'm going to do eclairs or cream puffs, I obviously don't. I like Dijon mustard. Anytime you hear me talk about mustard, it's always Dijon. In my opinion, it's about the only mustard. This is my favorite brand. But I'm just going to add a little teaspoonful here, right in there, give it a nice flavor. And we're going to do the same thing. Again, notice I'm holding this straight up and down, and I'm stirring only in one direction. Now, fun story about the name pâte à choux. It means, if you translate it literally, cabbage pastry. And the reason that it means that is because when these cook as cream puffs and when you put them in the oven, people think that they look like little cabbages. So that is why it is called pâte à choux. Okay, or choux pastry. You'll hear that. Some people will call it choux paste, and it has nothing to do with what you wear on your feet. Okay, so you can see I've got 2 eggs in here. It's got a little bit of a sheen to it. Now we're going to do what I very technically call the thingy. You take a little piece between your fingers and you give it a little bit of a pull. Now don't do it really rapidly and go, ha, or else it'll break. But that's what you're looking for. Will it pull? If it'll pull like this, you're done. If it snaps like that, even with just gentle pulling, then you need more egg. Sometimes you just need a little more egg. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this and about a tablespoon, you'll take an egg and you'll scramble it, and a tablespoon at a time, you'll add it to the mix. Once you've got it though, and you know you've got your thingy going correctly, now you're going to add some cheese. I don't know, about a half a cup, sounds about right. Traditionally, it is Gruyere, but I've made it with blue cheese, I've added some bacon crumbles, I've added parsley and lemon zest, and it's a pretty blank slate dough, so whatever you want to add into it is going to be just fine. Okay. Notice though I did keep my stirring to a very bare minimum. You just kind of want to fold it in. Again, really don't want to overwork those gluten strands. Once we have the dough ready to go, you're going to need a piping bag. Now, unfortunately, a Ziploc bag is not going to work here. It's too stiff of a dough. Maybe a freezer Ziploc bag will work, but usually I have a lot of problems with them exploding out the bottom. Nice thing is though, you don't really need a tip. If you really, really want a tip, especially for gougere, you just need the biggest round tip you can find. Sometimes for eclairs, people will use a star tip, but when it comes to a gougere, straight out of the bag, not a problem. When you load the bag, if you notice, I have this large cuff over my hand, okay? That makes sure that we have enough space to twist it at the top so that it does not come back up over the top on us, okay? And also, if you notice, that also means that I can use this part of my thumb to scrape the spatula or the spoon. Now that I have my pastry bag loaded, I'm going to give it a little twist just like this, okay? And you only want to squeeze from the top. I see too many people who grab right here and try and push from here, and you have half the pressure going this way, half the pressure going this way. It's not consistent, and that's how it explodes out the back and comes all over you. Now there's a super sneaky trick that professionals use when they're doing pâte à choux, because pâte à choux, again, really stiff dough. So if I just pipe it straight on the parchment paper, it likes to pick the parchment paper up with me and it won't stay down. So all you do is you use the dough as a little bit of glue in each of the four corners, and then it will not come up. You're going to go straight up and down. Notice I came very close to the paper, but I did not exactly touch it. Okay. And then once I get them to the size I want, I stop squeezing and I pull up. And I know you're thinking to yourself, yes, but what about those tails? That's why I have my nifty little bowl of water. After you go through and pipe them, you get your finger wet and you just push it down. Very simple. Okay, if you don't push those tails down, you are going to run the risk of them burning. Okay, so you do want to make sure and push them all down. Usually what you do is you pipe off the whole thing and then you go back and push down your tails. I have my whole tray piped now. I've got all the dough piped onto here. If you notice, I didn't worry too much about spacing them fairly close together. That's because if we've done the dough correctly, they're going to go straight up and they will not expand this way very much. And I'm pretty sure we've done the dough correctly here. Now they're going to go straight into the oven. Takes anywhere from about 15 to 20 minutes, sometimes a bit longer if your oven runs cold. If you've got two trays in there at once, that'll take longer. If you keep opening the oven, it'll take forever. But 15 to 20 minutes on average for about the size that I piped. When they're ready to come out, I'll show you what they look like. Here's what our gougere look like now. Nice and golden brown and ready to come out of the oven. Now that I've got these gougere out of the oven, you can go ahead and eat them now, but they burn your mouth a little bit, so you gotta be careful. You can also fill them if you'd like. That is how some people do them. They'll fill them with, I've used goat cheese mousse. You can use these as like little bite-sized sandwiches at an hors d'oeuvre party. I've done like lobster rolls or crab filling or something like that in them. I've done like BLTs, or I've done all kinds of things with these. It's basically a blank dough. With cheese in them, it makes it savory. Without the cheese, it can go either way. If you're going to fill these, you can use a piping bag filled with whatever filling you're going to use, and you can poke it through the bottom here. Then you'll just see the top of it like this. You can see they all look like they're little baby cabbages here. If you are going to put something on the top, I've put mayonnaise and lettuce on the top, or I've put other garnish on the top before. You can poke it through the top, and then that way you don't get something on the plate as you set it down. The reason that these are so easy to fill is if you see, they are quite hollow. Okay, that egg, the reason why is because you actually started the starch gelatinization, say that 5 times fast, by cooking it the first time, and then, but when you added the eggs, they puff, but they stay hollow because the starch has already formed its shape. Okay, so this is what the inside should look like. The one problem that you're going to have with gougere is that they're horribly addictive. And if you ever take them to a party, which they're great because you can make a huge batch, pop some in the freezer, just pull them out whenever you're ready to go. But the one problem you're going to have is everybody's going to keep asking you to make more because they are absolutely delicious. I hope you have fun making them and eating them like I do.